I'm George Asias, founder of African Speakers and Artists, and I'd like to welcome you to Trailblazers. Today on Trailblazers, we have Lora-Mungai, founder and CEO of Restless Global, a Pan-African company that develops and produces Africa-inspired film and TV projects for an international audience. Marie, I'm very glad that we caught you here in Nairobi. You're certainly one of the most well-traveled speakers that we have on our roster, and in fact I think you're flying tonight, so I'm particularly happy we managed it.
I am.
But it seems that all the traveling you've been doing has well, really been very successful for you, because I think today you were made a young global leader for the World Economic Forum, and you're one of only 100 people around the world, so this is a remarkable achievement. And many, many congratulations.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to be part of this community. It's a very, very interesting community of young global leaders under 40 who are socially minded and are looking forward to having a positive impact on the world. So I'm really excited about joining it. One
of the projects and endeavors that you're probably best known for and has become a flagship of your kind of media business is the XYZ show, which is a sort of satirical program. I think anyone who was around in the 80s might link it to Spitting Image. Is that fair to say? Yes. How did that come about, that direction down this sort of satirical kind of path?
So I was in Kenya covering the lead up to the elections of 2007, and I got to interview the person who's probably the most famous cartoonist here, who's Gado. And he told me about this project he had been trying to put together for several years and showed me a clip, and I immediately recognized what he was trying to do, because it was a local version of not only Spitting Image, but for me, growing up in France, we had a show called Les Guignols de l'Info, which was extremely influential when I was growing up, and still today. It still exists. So I immediately understood what he was trying to do, and also what I could bring to the project, because it was really difficult at the time to make TV broadcasters understand what the show was about. It was controversial, it was expensive, and actually immediately after I had met with Gado, two weeks later, the Kenyan elections took place and went very badly, as you know. And as we entered the post-election violence, which I covered as a journalist, I mean, for 4 months the country really was on lockdown. It was really a very bad moment in Kenyan history. I kept thinking to myself, if a show like this had been on the air, then maybe people would have had a platform to discuss very big issues with more perspective than having all this pent-up violence and anger, take that shape. So then I got back to Gado and said, let's partner on this. And so we launched the show after 1 year of fundraising, which was a whole thing in itself. We launched the show in 2009, and it immediately became a very big thing because it was new. We were saying things that no one was daring to say at the time. And that was a great experience. And since then we have launched a show called Ogas at the Top in Nigeria, which is similar. And we've also helped train teams to launch similar shows in Tanzania and Uganda. And what was really great through this project was we were able to really see the impact that satire and humor can have really in the advancement of societies.
Another one of your high-profile projects is the creation of Boony TV, which is the continent's first video-on-demand service, or one of the first. So what led you down that particular path of VOD and technology?
Well, the launch of Boony TV in 2012, and indeed we were one of the first video-on-demand services in Africa, very much a pioneer, came from really the trying to find a way to better distribute our own content, the XYZ show, Ogas at the Top and others, but also other African content, and make it available to people across the continent, outside of the continent, for an affordable price. We also were banking on the explosion of mobile and the fact that people were now able to watch videos on mobile, and to really try to leverage this to expand on the African story. Now I'm glad that actually the platform was recently acquired by international media group Trace TV a few months ago, and so they're using our expertise to launch their own VOD service in the next few days.
And now you've transitioned into more narrative storytelling. Why that choice? Do you find fiction to be a more compelling medium than journalism?
I think you can go further in what you're trying to accomplish, and the number of people you're trying to reach through narrative storytelling rather than through traditional journalism. Because what narrative storytelling does is that it helps connect you with characters at a very deep level. So with what I do, I think that I can use the craft of storytelling to get the rest of the world to understand the humanity of people around the world, and specifically in Africa. Because I do believe that a lot of the reason why Africa has always seemed to be at the, at the bottom of the totem pole of concerns around the world is because there's still this lack of understanding, specifically from the West towards Africa. So there's historical reasons, there's reasons that have very much to do with prejudice and racism, but there's this barrier that people don't seem to understand, the deep needs and desires of people in Africa who are the same as everyone else in the world. Yeah. So through the stories that I develop, that's what I'm trying to tap into.
I mean, we've obviously followed your career and the content produced by your businesses very closely, particularly since you joined the African Speakers and Artists roster. And I've noticed that there's actually a very strong educational aspect to the output from your companies. Why is that?
Well, so first of all, I do think that there's a lot that, through the skills and the projects that I'm, developing, that I can help the West understand about Africa. But also I think there's a lot that Africa can teach the West, especially in the times that we live now, where, Western societies in Europe and in the US have entered a state of really deep and long-term insecurity. The Western societies are not stable anymore, and Western societies are not used to dealing with a state of instability and fear, of constant fear of the future. Meanwhile, if we look at African societies, they've been living in similar situations for a very long time. So no one in Africa calls it resilience when we talk in conversations, but that's really what it is. In Africa, we just call it, coping or moving on, or also TIA, this is Africa, but it's just, what you have to do to continue with life. So I think that's a very strong thing that Western societies can learn from Africa. We see it in very different ways in practical terms. For example, the importance of entrepreneurship on the continent. This is also because you cannot rely on anyone else, so you really have to make your own luck. So yes, I'm interested in all these elements that might not be known in the West, but that should be seen as resources, as we're all trying to figure out how to handle this new world order.
You always seem to have a myriad of projects on the go. What's exciting you the most at the moment that might be under development?
So I'm very excited about one of the big TV series that I'm developing at the moment, which is called The Trade. And it's a little bit like Africa's answer to The Wire. So it's set in the world of the drug trade in West Africa, so mostly in Nigeria and in Guinea-Bissau, which is actually Africa's first narco state. And we follow the investigation of an undercover officer who's trying to bring down a Latin American cartel operating in the region. So it's a narrative TV series. It's fiction, but it's very much based on a lot of research and real facts. And again, complex characters, good guys, bad guys, everybody's a bit good or a bit bad, with African leads. And it's currently under development with Canal+ overseas, which is kind of a French HBO. So I'm very excited about that.
So the way the world engages and talks about Africa has changed a lot over the years. How do you find that reflected in the way you tell your stories and in the advice that you give brands or potential media industry folk or whoever it might be?
Well, it has changed a lot, mainly because of the narrative of Africa rising. So this has emerged a few years ago. There's several components. Of course, a lot of it is based on the tech boom across Africa, but there was also, a lot of economies across Africa really growing at very fast rates. And that made the world pay attention to what was going on the continent, because all of a sudden it might be a market, and because growth is slowing down everywhere. everywhere else, people started to take notice. However, what I find a bit challenging with that, or a bit dangerous maybe, is that the tendency then to see everything and to forget about the challenges and to go too much in the other direction. 2016 was very difficult for a lot of African economies. The price of commodities really went down. Nigeria is now in recession. So does it mean that the Africa Rising narrative is wrong? Well, that's debatable, but that goes to my point of complexity. We should not be trying to just simplify, you know, Africans are good, Africans are bad, African economies are growing, or they're not. It's a process, and you know, everybody would be better served in trying to understand the mechanisms behind it and the complexity. So for me, when I advise companies or when I organize events or panels or moderate debate, that's always what I'm trying to bring. First of all, I'm trying to bring different voices to the table, so people from across the continent, because it's very diverse, and also to go beyond the headlines. So what is it on the ground, and what is the truth, and where is it rising, where is it not, why, and what's really the future potential, and how to reap the benefits, because you know, you do have to know how to navigate this market. It's quite difficult, so I'm trying to bring the nuance and the complexity to the conversation.
And you've been, over the years, pretty much a fixture at a lot of film festivals around the world as a keynote speaker and a panelist, and media industry events like Discop, I think over the last 4 or 5 years, or maybe even longer. But you're now moving beyond that, and you've been asked to speak at many more corporate events beyond the industry all over the world. What are the typical topics that you're now asked to speak on when brands look to draw on your experience of working in Africa over the last 11 years or so?
One topic that I think is very important is the one of, again, under the theme of what Africa can teach the West or the rest of the world, is doing more with less, and how African innovators use scarcity as a resource. Africans are among the most innovative people in the world. Thinking outside of the box is something that everybody does here. You don't always follow the rules, and that's how you create. So really analyzing what's going on in that world is important. Another one is empathy and compassion. These are African values that can be useful to the world, especially today, where a lot of Western countries have lost that and have become really hard, especially in business environments, and how that can actually make sense, how more empathy can make more sense, both in dealing with your team, with your customers, and also understanding others when you have to work in multicultural environments. So these are very important topics. Another one is what I call all business is social business in Africa, and why impact has to be at the core of every business model in Africa. And why is that? Is that basically, as long as you create value and you create jobs, you are having a social impact in a society that's growing. So for me, any impact, any business is a social business in Africa. And I think these are some of the main themes that I like to talk about when I advise companies about how should they expand to Africa, or how should they interact with Africa.
Well, Marie, it's been a pleasure. Once again, I'm very glad we caught you. Safe travels this evening. And congratulations once again on becoming a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. It sounds like you've got a huge year ahead. And all the very best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.